Hello, John Miyares from the USDA NASS Great Lakes Regional Field Office in East Lansing, Michigan. In this presentation, I want to take some time to look at how to work with segments that were newly rotated into the sample this year. First, we will look at a segment that has no names associated with it. Then, we will look at a segment that has some names that were pre-populated into CAPI from the pre-screening activities that took place in regional field offices between December and January. I want to take a look at what happens with brand new segments that don't have any tracts already associated with them. I've set up this enumerator here and assigned 3 brand new segments. All we see here are going to be the 3 gray bars, and there are no track records. If I click on the summary button, you're going to get this message that says there are no records to display. This isn't going to be particularly helpful, so let me close out of that. Remember, every new segment eventually is going to have at least one tract associated with it, even if that tract is a non-agricultural tract that covers the entire segment. So let's pretend I have a segment like that, which is 100% non-agricultural. Perhaps the segment is located inside a national forest where there is no ag activity and no potential for ag activity in the future. If I want to add the tract, I'll click on the Add button, and of course I'll get this warning, are you sure you want to add a new tract? I'll click Yes. On June 1, did you operate inside these red lines? Now, keep in mind for a segment that is completely taken up by forest land, you may not have anyone to talk to or to ask the question, do you live or operate inside the red lines? For all intents and purposes, we're just going to say yes. Otherwise, we won't be able to move forward. Now, I want to back out of this record for a second and look back at my CAPI listings. If I go back to the summary on the gray bar, notice now I'm told that the segment has 649 digitized acres. I don't have any tracts accounted for, but I do have tract A started. I can't submit the segment until all of the acres and all of the tracts are accounted for. So I'm going to close this up, and I'm going to go back into this record and screen it as a non-ag tract with 649 acres of forest land. I'll click Next because assuming we've already drawn out the boundaries, because the boundaries of the tract are the same as the boundaries of the segment, saying this is a national forest in, I don't know, nowhere, Michigan. Don't have a phone number to insert in here. And I'm going to answer all of the screening questions with no. When I click on the Next button, I'll say there were 649 acres of national forest land. There is no potential for agriculture before June of next year, and the entire tract is woods. I'll click Next. I've reached the end of the survey. Thank you for your participation. I know this is my only tract in the segment. I know it accounts for all the acres, so I'm going to submit the tract. I'll get my warning. That's okay. And now, let me go back to the summary button. Notice here, I have one non-ag tract, no ag tracts. I've accounted for all of the acres, so this segment is complete. With that, I'm going to submit this segment and call it good. Of course, if you had a segment with more than one tract, we could just continue adding new tracts and entering the information from the screening forms. Just remember that when you add a new tract in CAPI, it will start with the next available tract letter. So please make sure when you're entering this data, you're keeping everything consistent between what's written on the screening form, what's drawn on the photograph, and what you enter into CAPI. So let's say I was looking at this segment that was discussed in another video where tract A was 20 acres of homes in any town. I don't have a phone number for it. I'm just going to screen all of these as no. And we were assuming there were 20 acres of homes with no potential for agriculture. We were coding that as residences. And I can either submit the tract now, or I can screen another tract and submit it later. If we're confident about the acres, then it's probably okay to submit the tract now. If we weren't sure about the acres because we might have needed to grid it out later and we're worried about making sure that our RADA ratio looks good, then we can screen another tract and submit that tract later. Let's add another one. When I click Add Now, it's going to give me tract B. Tract B in that example was a water treatment plant. We had an address of 100 Main Street in Anytown. We had a phone number, 555. Again, since this is a water treatment plant, we are going to answer all of the screening questions with no. There were 23 acres. Specify this was a water treatment plant with no potential for agriculture, and we coded this as obvious non-ag. And this one I'm going to submit. The third tract that will be added will be tract C. And in that example, our operator's name was Bob Builder. We had an address, 2500 600th Street in Anytown. We had a phone number. We had notes that it was a cell number. But Bob Builder was farming, so we're going to click on yes, because there have been crops grown or a hay cut on the total acres operated. I'll click next. And if we are already past the pre-screening period and in the main data collection period, we can begin the AgTrack questionnaire. Now, I'm not going to finish this segment out, but you can get the idea that as I keep clicking the add button, it is going to add the next available tract based on the next letter available. Next one being D, then E, then F. And this is how we can work with new segments that do not have tracts already associated with them. I want to now look at a slightly different scenario. Here we have a new segment that has been pre-populated with the names of potential operators that were identified during pre-screening back in January. What makes these names different from the others is that these names have not yet been verified as actually operating in the segment, but they were added to the CAPI listings based on the fact that we were fairly confident that these people were actually either operating in the segment or were living in the segment. There's a few things about these records that I want to note right away. First, all of the POIDs end in the number 3. This is to help distinguish them from operations that are already on the frame, which will have POIDs ending in 0. Second, all of these tracts have been pre-assigned a tract letter. These tract letters cannot be changed, unfortunately, so if we do verify, for example, that GI Love Money of corporate interest is operating in the segment, and we determine the general location of this tract, we have to mark that tract on the photo with the letter A. That goes for each of these other tracts as well. Now, some of the pre-populated tracts may have comments on them. You might be looking at these tracts and asking yourself, if I've never talked to this person, then where did the comment come from? Let's click on this comment link here for tract F and see what it says about the tract. Notice what it says. It says, this piece of land in the northeast portion of the segment looks like it's mostly woods, approximately 54 acres, north 70 west, borders the east side of the field. If you see a comment that says PPT here, that comment came from the pre-screening tool used by staff at the regional office who were researching the segments back in January. And those comments were intended to help you identify where that tract could potentially be located within the segment. Now, also notice that the names and addresses that are given here are in bold-faced italic print. When you see this, those names and addresses in bold italics are allowed to be changed if we discover that what we have done is identify the wrong person initially. If you compare that to an old segment down here, for example, this is segment number 150246, the print is in plain text and not in italics. The names and addresses listed on the old segments cannot be changed without adding a new tract letter to the segment. Now let's say in this scenario, you have tract B has been preliminarily assigned to John Doe. Suppose you called John Doe and he tells you that he no longer operates and no longer lives in the segment. What you could do is go into that particular tract by clicking on the B2. And then when you see the screener question, you could ask, on June 1, did you operate inside the red lines? And the answer would be no. We could hit OK. And that would now show over here that John Doe is no longer in the segment. Now let's suppose that in your conversation with John Doe, you learn that his aunt, Jane Doe, lives at the house that he used to live at in the segment, and that her son Joseph, who lives outside the segment, cuts the hay that's on the property. So what we need to do is add Jane as a non-ag resident in the segment, and then add Joseph as an ag tract operator who lives outside the segment. But let's say you really don't like the idea of having to waste this tract letter B2 because you already have the address and maybe even the phone number already correct in the system. The only thing that isn't correct is the name John Doe. What you could do is go back into that same tract, and this time we can screen them in. So I'm going to click on the B2, and then we'll look at the question again and say, on June 1, did you operate inside the red lines? I can say yes, and as soon as I hit OK, the address verification screen is going to pop up. On this screen, this is where we can change the name from John Doe to Jane Doe. We can also double check and update the phone numbers here if they are not correct. We can also verify whether or not what they have is a cell phone number or if a particular number has been disconnected. And then we'll hit Save Info. Now from here, what we'll do is treat Jane as a non-ag tract operator. So I'll hit Next. What were the boundaries? Are there any crops grown or hay cut? Well, she's not doing it herself, so we're going to just say no, and we're going to go through all of these screening questions and say no. We'll get to next. We'll specify that her farmstead is only 1 acre. It is residential. Is there potential for agriculture? No. And we're going to just say this is residential. This qualifies as a non-ag tract, and I'm going to screen another tract. And notice in our screen that Jane Doe has replaced John Doe with the same address information. We have it now coded as non-ag at 1 acre in tract B. Now, let's say we were able to get the contact information for Jane's son Joseph, who is the one who cuts the hay that surrounds Jane's house. So you call Joseph and you ask him for some information, but he's a little skeptical about why you're giving him a call. Joseph never received a map in the mail, so he's not exactly sure what you're talking about. What you could do is direct Joseph to go to the Ag Counts website, www.agcounts.usda.gov. You would need to provide for him a survey code that will get him access to the parcel map. The survey code will be pre-printed on the front page of the screener form for the segment, right below the county name information on the right-hand side of the page. Let's see what happens when we go into the website. So you would encourage Joseph to click on this link that says June Area Survey Segment Master, and that will pull up a slightly different information screen. Say, thank you for helping NAS with the June Area Survey. Select the image below to view the map containing the segment boundary being surveyed. So if you click on this globe, what it is going to do is pull up an electronic copy of the segment parcel map. This is the same map that you have in your segment envelope, and you can work with Joseph to try to determine what part of the segment he might be operating in. For example, It might be that Jane has the residence in parcel 11 and that Joseph is haying this field, which would be parcel 7. Now, perhaps we were not able to contact Joseph during pre-screening to verify that he's still haying that field. What we could do is add Joseph's name and contact information into the CAPI system. Now, you might be wondering why I might do this without actually having talked to Joseph. Well, if we are very certain that Joseph is the one who is cutting the hay in those fields, then by adding his name to the tract listing in CAPI at this time, then he will get mailed a map and the information for completing the ag tract questionnaire in May, just in time to complete the June survey. So to add his name, I'm just going to click on the Add button. Are you sure you want to add a new tract? We'll say yes. Did you operate inside the red lines? Yes. And when we add the new tract, it doesn't give us any information here. I will need to click on the new tract G7 to restart the interview. Did you operate inside the red lines? Yes. What were the boundaries? Now we're going to ask to get the full information. We'll say this is going to be Joseph Doe. And then we will say that he is on Highway 1 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And we can get the zip code and his phone number. We'll just say 765-332-2222. And then screen him in. On the total acres operated, have there been or will there be any crops grown, hay cut, livestock, poultry? Well, he's cutting the hay. We say yes. It immediately says the respondent qualifies as an ag tract operator. I'm going to click on next. And then we can just go back and screen another tract. At this time, we are not allowed to just submit the screener and start the survey because we do not have the ability to enter data into the ag tract questionnaires, at least not until we get closer to the 1st of June. So I'll click on screen another tract, and that will bring me back to my listing. Now notice that there are these big X buttons over here that will allow you to delete a tract from the listing if you want to. However, I would avoid using this button where you can. If you delete a tract and the tract letter that goes with it, you will not be able to use that tract letter again. So let's say, for example, I do X out tract G. Are you sure you want to delete the tract? I'll say OK. And now let's say I want to add a new tract. I want to add a new tract. I get yes. Operate inside the red lines. And notice that what comes up is tract H. Tract G is no longer available to be used. This could be an issue if you have a segment with a lot of parcels and a lot of names on it. The maximum number of tracts allowed in any one segment is 99. I would caution anyone about using more than 80 tract letters in a new segment, just in case you need room to grow the segment later. Where possible, you want to try to use these tracts that might not have the correct name in them, but that you could replace the name of the person and their address in the CAPI system so that the letter does not get wasted.